Hi, welcome back to my studio. I'm playing in the cold wax and oil paints again today. So I've started this and I'm just going to experiment with some different mark making and see where I end up. Totally intuitive process today. So I'm just starting with a piece of artist board and I am mixing clear acrylic gesso with hot heavy bodied yellow acrylic paint, and I'm going to lay a base layer down on this board of this yellow gesso acrylic mixture. I have several colors of the cold wax and oil paint mixed up on my palette. So I just want to establish some darks first on top of this yellow base. And as I scrape back later, I'm hoping to get pops of that bright yellow coming through and also mixing in tone with some of the wax and oil that I put on top. So I'm just using a bowl scraper here and just randomly applying some black. And I usually start with placing my darkest color in 3 spots. So even though it's kind of run together, it's still primarily situated in 3 different places on my board. And I do try and turn my board as I work to try to get a feel for which way is up, because sometimes it just looks totally different when you turn it around and look at it from a different perspective. So now I'm just going with some yellow ochre down the entire side there. And this first layer, I basically want to get the entire board covered with some cold wax and oil, and then I'll start playing around with some mark making after that. So I'm just going to fast forward through this first layer now. So here I'm using the side of my bowl scraper to just kind of scoot it sideways as I hold the edge against the artboard, and it makes these really cool kind of ray looking marks. And whenever I make marks, I have a tendency to want to kind of smooth over them. I know not everyone does that, but to me it's just a little more pleasing and cohesive to look at when it's not quite so stark. I'm sure there are places where you would want to not smooth it out, but that's kind of what I do at this point. I'm fairly new to the whole cold wax genre of art, so I'm learning and loving it, and every day is an experiment, just like with all my other art. So I always start with black and white in addition to the other colors that I have made up on my palette. So just to bring some lightness, I'm just adding some white mixture here and just smoothing it over. And you'll notice there toward the bottom on the left side, as the white mixes with that yellow ochre, it just mixes on the piece as opposed to having to be mixed on the palette. And you get a not quite as white spot there, which I liked. And you are constantly wiping wax off of your tools. I kind of go back and forth between using a palette knife to apply and then smoothing it out with the bowl scraper, and then sometimes applying it with the bowl scraper and using various tools to make marks in my layers. And in mark making, I like to try to scrape back to the history layers of a piece, which is why I started with that yellow base layer, so that when I scrape back or make marks, I'm actually going to expose that yellow color as opposed to just the white of the artboard. And the nice thing about cold wax, for me anyway, is if you put something down and you really don't like it, you can just scrape it off and do something different. It doesn't dry real fast like your acrylic paint would, or your watercolor even. It's just a totally different animal in my art arsenal. I'm used to acrylic painting where even if I add retarder to my paint, it's going to dry fairly quickly, and it's not going to just wipe right off so that I can do something else. So that's something that's really appealing to me about this cold wax technique. I have this little bottle that has the needle tip. It's referred to as an oiler boiler, and it's filled with Gamsol, which is a solvent for the cold wax and oil. And so I'm just dripping some on and squirting some out in sort of a swirly pattern. And then I'll wait about, I've found that about 20 seconds is usually just enough time for the Gamsol to go through a layer of cold wax, and then it can be scraped back, and that will reveal the layers underneath, but in kind of cool patterns however you put the Gamsol down on the board. So I'm just waiting here a few seconds and scraping it back in there. In that red section you can see the drips and the swirls from the Gamsol, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You kind of never know what you're going to get, which is part of the fun. You get a little bit there where you can see some yellow marks coming through, and a lot of the time it ends up getting totally covered up unless I pay real close attention to a section that I really like and I don't want to lose. But it can be done any number of times as you're working on a piece. So, and it can be difficult to see where the Gamsol is, so I have to kind of look at my board sideways to see if I got it all off, scraped it all back with my bowl scraper. And then every once in a while, as I'm doing there, I'll just go around the edges and get any of that excess paint that has accumulated on the edges, just scrape it off. I try to work clean as you can. It's a messy process. And usually, which I didn't do today, but usually I will tape my board to a piece of freezer paper so that I can grab onto the freezer paper to turn the board easily without getting my hands in the paint. And another reason is it helps to keep the back of the artboard or canvas or a cradle panel, whatever you're working on, paper, clean. Because as you can see, just every time I move it, I'm sitting it in the excess wax that is accumulated around it. So I do try to do that. So now I'm trying to decide what I want to use to make some marks in these layers that I have so far, and I'm adding just a little bit more of the yellow ochre, kind of in a pattern, I guess, down the side a little bit, just little spots that then I just sort of scrape together, but it still appears as little spots and not one big area of color. I'm just kind of doing whatever I feel at the moment. And I have this texture tool. It's kind of like a cat and nine tails kind of thing. Those are like plastic, thin plastic rods that are assembled into a brush type of a configuration. And I'm just scraping it through that yellow ochre that I put there on the top right. So I have this bright orange mixed up on my palette and trying to keep with the really warm color scheme. That bright yellow underneath kind of demanded that I do that, I think. So I have orange and the yellow ochre and that burgundy color that I mixed with using red and black. And I have some pottery tools that work really well to scrape through and reveal the history layers. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to fast forward through this again. It's basically adding more color and making more marks. I like to get in there with my fingers every once in a while. Applying the paint with the tip of your finger creates some really cool texture. So I'm just adding 3 little dots of the bright orange at the top there on the left, and then also 3 little dots on the opposite side. And I think it pulls your eye from one side of the piece to the other and kind of draws you across so that you notice everything in between. I also like to use unusual tools to make marks. This is just a great big heavy, not great big, but it's a large spring, but it's very heavy duty metal. There it is. And I just rolled it through and let it pick up some of the wax, and I really like what that did. And then I just have a bottle cap from a milk jug, and I'm just kind of incising into the wax layers just by pushing down, making some circular marks. I was hoping by going into that dark area that I would get down to that yellow. You can barely see it, and then once I smooth over it, you really don't see it at all. So, but I know they're there. Then I went down to this corner and added some orange. And looking at it now, I kind of wish that I had just left that orange there, but you'll see in a second that I didn't. And I could have scraped it back and brought the orange back, but I really didn't notice it until now watching the video. But my intent was just to scribe into that orange paint back to the yellow with the end of my paintbrush. But after I played around in this corner for a bit, I stepped back and looked at it and didn't really like it. So I'm going to get rid of all that in a second. I really need to be more patient, I think, with this type of art and let it sit for a few minutes and maybe walk away and come back and say, do I really not like it? Because oftentimes I'll do something, then immediately go, no, I don't like that, and then I cover it up or scrape it off or do something else. And I kind of liked it looking at it here, but I didn't keep it. So I tried several different things down here in this corner, just different marks, and just decided I pretty much didn't like any of them. Yep, not that one either. So I just kept playing with it and scraped it back and had a lot of black on my bowl scraper, so then I added the black back onto that corner there. So now I have a color shaper tool, and I'm just echoing those kind of rays that I made above there with my bowl scraper and just putting similar marks in that little corner section. I stuck the bottle cap there at the very corner. I think I started to think, oh, this kind of all reminds me somewhat of a sun figure icon. So I'm coming to the end here, and where I added that orange swash, I decided to just do some asemic writing through there and just use the end of my paintbrush just to add some interest and some more mark making. So this is basically done. I'm gonna let it sit and set up for several days, and I may add more to it, but for right now I'm gonna leave it be. I hope you enjoyed watching this process. If you did, give it a thumbs up and maybe share it with someone else who you think might like it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And in the meantime, go make some art. Bye.